I think a lot of people are missing out on a lot of written material. So I want to go through some of it and show it to people and help explain it to them. Today I'll be looking at this article I wrote. In the future I'll also be doing some discussions I've had and possibly some books. These are posting tips about how to have a discussion at a serious intellectual discussion forum. First one, if you think a criticism is irrelevant, say so and give your reasoning. When you disagree with someone about relevance, that is a disagreement which you should discuss in a truth-seeking manner rather than something to ignore. When you think someone's stuff is off-topic, irrelevant, etc., there's a reason they said it. They thought it was relevant. You should discuss your disagreement, your difference of perspective, instead of just ignoring it. If you ignore your disagreement, you are sabotaging the discussion. It's not going to work out, and it's going to be your fault. Next, if you think one of their criticisms is unimportant, say so, give your reasoning. They thought it was important, that's why they said it. If you disagree, you should argue your case instead of just ignoring the problem. When you don't express your disagreements and just ignore people saying a bunch of stuff you disagree with, and then you ignore it and keep trying to have the discussion, while there's this ongoing disagreement, you are causing problems. You're confusing things. Like, you didn't say what you think. They don't know that you disagree. You didn't tell them. So don't do that. If you think a criticism is pointlessly picky, it's the same thing. Explain your case. They thought it was worthwhile. That's why they said it. You might be right. Maybe it was pointlessly picky, unimportant, off-topic, whatever. You could be correct, but you have not argued your case. You don't know what their reasoning is for why it's relevant. You haven't asked them a question to find out, nor have you tried to correct them. If you discuss it with them, you could find out who's correct and why. This is how discussion in general works. You find places you disagree with people, and then you talk about them, and then you try to figure out what's incorrect, and someone learned something. Someone was wrong and gets corrected. Some of the reasons people skip discussions, they don't express things, is they just assume they're right, so the correction must be for the other guy, and they don't think it's worth their time to help the other guy. This is a bad attitude to discussion, and it's very arrogant. Some of the time you're wrong, and you're not going to find out if you won't talk about it. If you think you're so much better than the other guy that you're just going to be right about every single disagreement, I think you're the one ruining the discussion and being unreasonable. Or if you really think that, argue your case. How is it that you're so much better than him? And what should he do to catch up? Help him. Explain it to the rest of us so we can catch up to you or whatever. Alright, if you think someone's mean, rude, or bad, say so, give your reasoning. There's a theme here. They were not being mean or rude on purpose, usually. They were trying to have a discussion. Now, this doesn't apply to every forum. If you're on Twitter and someone seems like they're being rude and mean, they're probably just rude and mean. That's what Twitter is frequently like. However, if you're on a serious discussion forum where the discussion quality in general is pretty decent, then you should not just presume people are being mean, rude, and bad on purpose, just intentionally, and that you should instead, say, hey, I think that was mean, isn't that bad, and see what they say. Now, they might say, fuck you. So you're like, okay, well, I thought they were mean. I said so. They told me to fuck myself. Now you can say, okay, well, this person is mean and rude and bad, and I'm going to ignore them. But if you never ask, you're not sure what's going to happen. Maybe he'll say, oh, I wasn't trying to be mean. It must be a misunderstanding. It could be okay. You won't find out if you don't talk about it. Also, don't be sarcastic. Don't say insulting jokes. Don't say, I was just teasing, I didn't mean it, as a way to attack people, but also take it back. Don't do that shit. And if someone else does it to you, call them out. Ask about it. Say, hey, I think sarcasm is bad. Here's why I think it's bad. Like, not everyone knows sarcasm is bad. Not everyone knows, like, a lot of teasing is not actually okay. You can discuss those things. You might disagree about them. You might disagree with me. So you can discuss it instead of just ignoring people because they said something you disagree with. You need to interpret when they do something bad, that means you disagree with them. It doesn't mean they're bad. It means you think they're bad. They disagree. You disagree about what's true. You can discuss it. So if you have a problem of any kind, give your reasoning. That's how truth-seeking works. Never use quotes if you're not giving an exact quote. Don't manually type in quotes, just copy-paste them. You can type in, like, if it's a paper book, but if it's from the internet, just copy paste so you don't have typos in quotes, because it's not okay to misquote people. It's not okay to say they said this when it's actually different than what they said. That's a common way people screw up discussions. Don't do that. It is avoidable. It's an avoidable error. If you don't want to get quotes exactly right, if you don't want to be that careful, picky, precise, whatever, just don't use quotes. You don't have to quote people. But if you want to use quotes, they have to be actual quotes. Don't misquote people. Try to answer questions with clear, direct answers. A lot of times, people are asked a question and they just don't answer. They say a bunch of stuff that is not an answer to the question. It is important for productive discussions to both ask and answer clear questions. Sometimes you want information from the other guy. Ask him a specific question. What information do you want? Request it from him. Don't just sort of say some things about the topic and expect him to give the information that you think is important. You need to communicate what you think is important. A lot of the ways people screw up discussion is they under-communicate. They don't realize the other person doesn't know everything they know, doesn't think about everything the same way. They underestimate how different other people are. All right, next point. Try not to lie. You're going to lie anyways. Like, everyone lies so fucking much. If you are not like an expert philosopher who has found many, many lies in the past and like fixed your own lies, if you haven't gone through that process of improvement where you found out about many ways you're dishonest and changed, then you are dishonest. You lie a lot. But you can still put effort into lying less, watching out for your lies, trying to do something about it. And in particular, if someone thinks you're lying, that is criticism. That's not a personal attack. That is useful information. If you're really lying, that's something you should want to know. It's something you want to improve. So instead of saying, oh my God, he called me a liar, he's flaming me, fuck him, you should say, oh, he thinks he has this important information about a common problem. It's just like calling someone biased. That is a common problem. Bias is a thing that happens to people a lot, and it's something that's really useful to get feedback about. If you can get a bias pointed out to you, that's valuable. If you can get a lie pointed out to you, that's valuable. It'll help you stop lying. Now, not every time they point it out, they're going to be correct, but you can discuss it. You can do it in a truth-seeking way. A lot of times, people's reaction to having a lie pointed out or a bias is to say, no, I didn't. I totally didn't do that. I'm not lying. It's just true. Or I'm not biased. That's my objective opinion. They rely on the authority of their personal experience, how they feel. They don't feel like they're lying, therefore they think they're not lying. They don't understand that lying is an objective thing and that we often fool ourselves. We trick ourselves. We lie to ourselves more than to anyone else. So if you don't think you're lying, you could still be lying to yourself. That is actually very common. It's worth considering and discussing. To understand things really clearly, try to understand things really clearly. Raise your standards for what you think is clear understanding. If you're in doubt, ask questions. A lot of people ruin discussions because they're confused and they think that's good enough and they try to move on and they don't get it, but they're used to really low standards, like from school, where it's like if you pass the test, you just like get some multiple choice questions right, and that's called understanding. But you don't actually understand the ideas very well. People pass school tests all the time when they're like really confused and don't get it. They just like memorize some shit the night before. So it is important to try to really pay attention to what you actually clearly understand. Could you argue this yourself? Could you explain it to someone? Could you teach it to someone? Could you write an article on it? If no, then you don't really understand it that well. Okay, the question, I don't understand. Well, it's not really a question, but that's a bad question. That is bad feedback. If you don't understand what someone's saying, be more specific. Which specific thing they said, like which sentence do you not understand? Which paragraph do you not understand? Which idea do you not understand? Give some sort of information about which parts you do and don't understand. If you don't understand literally everything, say, I don't understand literally everything. Like I couldn't understand a single sentence you said. If that's actually true, it's usually not, but if it's actually true, you can say that. But that's different than I don't understand. That's I don't understand every single sentence, so still different. So when someone writes something, they're like doing their best to make it understandable or whatever, hopefully. They have some understanding of what do people not understand, what is useful to explain, what's helpful to people, and they wrote that. And if you say, I don't get it, they're like, okay, but, I tried to help you, and you're not getting it, so what's the problem? Like, give me some feedback about what direction to go, like, what parts do you need more explanation for? You have to give someone a new piece of information they didn't have when they wrote the first thing, or they can't customize it for you. In order to customize it to make it better for you, they need new information, new feedback that they didn't have before. One of the good things to do is talk about what you tried. Like, if you're confused about something, what did you try? Did you do Google searches? Did you read any books about it? Did you read a Wikipedia article? What have you done to get the answer? Did you think of some potential solutions and then think, but that's not going to work for this reason? So did you brainstorm five ideas and then also reject them? You criticize them? Tell them, I went through this idea, it didn't work. I went through this idea, it didn't work. And that's going to give people a better understanding of what you're thinking and how to help. So what have you already done to solve the problem yourself is an important thing to tell people. And if the answer is nothing, consider actually doing something to solve the problem. You should do something. Try to figure it out. What could you do? Brainstorm some ideas. Google it. Do something. And then ask people for help when that doesn't work, when you get stuck, when you hit a hard part. But don't just ask them for help at the beginning. Like, you should be the master of your own learning process. You should be taking the initiative and learning what you want to learn, and then you're looking to these other people for help and tips and feedback and discussion. But you should be self-sufficient as much as you can be. Like, be reasonably independent, and then you get like this bonus help from other people. Don't just be at the beginning and be like, teach me everything. Read some books, try to look some things up, try to learn something, and then say, okay, I had trouble with this part and this part and this part. Because you should be able to understand, like, I don't know, half of what you read or something, probably more, right? So like, you could read a book about something you want to understand, and then you could understand like 3/4 of the book, and then you could ask about the parts you had trouble with. And that's a lot better than just saying, I know nothing about this field, tell me all the answers. I haven't read anything, I haven't done anything, just tell me everything. That's not a good way to have a discussion. Okay, this is a pretty specific tip, but keep your post pretty short and have at most 3 sections, which means respond to 3 different quotes at most. Because every time you have a block quote and then you respond to the block quote, that's like a section, and then you block quote something else and you respond to that quote. Now you're applying to 2 different points they made. So if you quote like 3 different things they said and you give 3 responses, now you have 3 sections. This makes post more complicated. Like, there's more different things going on. So you don't want to do too many of that. Some people try to have a post with like 10 sections in it. Sometimes I do that because I built up to that. I'm used to it. I've worked my way up to being able to deal with that. But other people will try to like copy it and do that. And usually it's overwhelming for them. They have trouble with it. They would be better off keeping it simpler until they're a lot more experienced. If a discussion is too complicated for you, if you're having trouble with that, ask for help, write a reply only at the bottom, just reply to everything together instead of trying to go detail by detail, and ask for help about how do you simplify it, how do you manage it, how do you handle it. Only post when calm. If you're being emotional, if you're angry or whatever, just don't post. Just take a break. Come back later. People are always like, oh no, I'm not angry. Like, if you're even the slightest bit angry that you noticed, you're probably like a fair amount angry. So just don't post. Just wait. Emotions are hard. You can ask for help with them later, but don't do it while you're having the emotion. If you want to work on your emotions, go to fallibleideas.com, click on emotions. And I've got this article, it'll help. It gives you ways to make progress in that area. Okay. If you have negative emotions in reaction to a post, that's your choice. You need to think of that as something you're doing. It's not something that's happening to you. It's not the post's fault. It's not the other poster's fault. That's you. Your emotions are your responsibility. You could learn better and change. This is a link to the emotions article. Don't blame the other guy. Even if he was rude, you didn't have to get emotional about it. You could just say, oh, he's rude. Like, that's sort of lame for him. He's probably an unhappy person. You don't have to get mad. You don't have to get upset. You don't have to feel hurt. You can just have a perspective on it. Like, there are people in the world who are rude, unhappy, mean, etc. It's not that big a deal for you, especially when they're just people you meet online, like not your family or something. So if you're getting all emotional about it, like, there's some error on your side there. You're not dealing with it well. Like, it's not that big a deal if someone on the internet has a negative opinion of you or says something unfair or like insults you. You shouldn't be reacting a huge amount to that. Okay, now, because you can and should ask for help with any problem you have, all your problems are your own fault, unless you actually brought up the problem and discussed it. So if you choose not to bring up a problem when there's help available, and then you have that problem, it's your fault. You didn't seek out the available help. And in particular, if you want to say, it's our fault, we don't know enough, we're not helpful enough, or whatever, for our forum, or at any forum, if you want to say the people who run this forum, the veteran posters, whatever, like they don't have good enough ideas, what you have to do, you discuss their solutions to whatever problem you're having with their forum. You try to understand like how they think it should be dealt with. You ask them about it, how to discuss effectively and get answers and learn and so on. And then you have to explain, why is their help inadequate? What's wrong with it? Why isn't it good enough? If you make an argument for that, then you could say that they have a problem. But if you don't do that, you have no case. Be careful with preconceptions. People make a lot of assumptions. This applies at a lot of forums, and our forum in particular, Fallible Ideas, has a lot of unconventional ideas. So don't just assume everything you think you know is true. Be open to different ideas. Don't just assume a bunch of cultural defaults. Now, on my blog, there are often important ideas in the comment section. I've put effort into making it a useful discussion forum with features like these quotes, and this block quote here is like a real discussion forum. It has red italics. It has permalinks. It has what you would want in a discussion forum. So people use it that way a fair amount, including me. So this is like basically a blog post worth of stuff. It's in the comments because I wanted to relate it to this post. They're both text on the same page. People have like a huge bias against comment sections. And, based on experience at a lot of websites, I can understand why people would have a bias against comment sections. However, there are a lot of good comments on this website in particular. I've put effort into cultivating that and encouraging that, and getting people who would write discussion posts in email to also write equally high quality comments on the blog. And I use it that way myself. Like, this could be a blog post, but I just stuck it here. Okay, so this was answering a question from Discord. The question was to Anne about getting better at discussing things. How long has she been at FI? So he was concerned that she was in a process of getting ready to discuss Popper, that she was in sort of preliminary phases, and that it was too slow, that it takes too long to learn how to have a rational discussion, and he wanted like a shortcut to be like rational right away and good at discussion right away in a shorter time period. So I wrote some comments about this, which I think are important. So I said, from kindergarten through 12th grade, school is 13 years of getting partially ready to discuss Popper. It's not enough. Throw in 10 more years to get a PhD in philosophy, and you might be worse at it than when you graduated high school. So being able to have a productive discussion about critical rationalism is hard. Like, most people can't do that. And even, 13 years, 23 years might not be enough. It depends what you do. Like, you have to do things that actually are effective. The more effective what you're doing is, the faster it can be. I didn't need a lot of time to prepare to discuss Popper, but other people do. That's okay. Wherever you are, you can make progress. Now, there are certain factors involved here. So, kindergarten through 12th grade is not focused on teaching the minimal stuff needed to discuss Popper, right? There's a lot of extra stuff there. It's useful in various ways, but it's extra in terms of how to discuss Popper rationally. Like, you could skip most of the math and still do okay at discussing Popper. Or you could skip the sports and the art. Okay, so could FI people get to Popper discussions faster? Sure. Anne has been voluntarily going slow. She's not in a hurry. She's found it useful to do other things. like some grammar stuff. And as I speak now, she's moved on from grammar. She's now working on some logic stuff, so making progress. And when she worked on the grammar stuff for a few months, she got better at it, not just at grammar, but at doing a organized learning project where she learned something over time and got better at it over time and so on. And, that's a really good experience for people to have. It's learning on her own outside of school and making that actually work and get somewhere. Like, a lot of people just can't do that at all. So it's a good thing to practice, and critical rationalism, being a hard philosophy, is not the best place to practice. Like, it's better to practice it with something a bit easier. To have a productive discussion about Popper, people ought to have like 10 substantial productive discussions first about easier topics. Right? That's fair, right? If you haven't had 10 discussions that were productive and effective and so on, you're a beginner. So you shouldn't be trying to discuss Popper. It is too hard for a beginner at discussion, right? You should get, at least to an intermediate level at discussion before trying to discuss something that's a really hard topic. So how long does that take? Well, potentially under a month. That's a month, given a lot of background knowledge. Like during school, you learn to read and you learn to write and so on. So given, years and years of schooling for background knowledge, maybe in under a month, you could have 10 productive discussions and then go from beginner at discussion to expert or to intermediate. Now, it depends how well you do. Some people, they just won't do this. They won't even try to do 10 productive discussions. They're just like, I want Popper first. And then they try to do it, and they're screwing up. At the same time, they're making discussion mistakes and Popper mistakes. Like they're misunderstanding stuff about philosophy, and they're messing up the discussion at the same time. And then they have like multiple problems coming from different angles, and it's too hard to deal with. It's overwhelming. It makes a mess. So if they just, get 10 discussions right first, then they're only learning one thing at a time. And then they start working on Popper, and they're only learning one thing at a time, the Popper stuff, because they're not screwing up the discussion too much. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly one thing at a time. Like, you could screw up the discussion a little bit while learning Popper, but you don't want to, have multiple major learning things at the same time. You want to focus your learning on one main point at a time without too many distractions and extra difficulties, especially for hard stuff. Okay, so conceivably you could do this in a month if you're pretty rational, but a lot of people just will literally spend months not even trying to do that and then complain that it's taking too long. Then other people, they'll try to do it and they find out that they're not very good at discussion, and on their first try, on their second try, on their fifth try, they're not able to have a productive discussion. They're not there yet. They need to learn some things before they can do that. If you're in that situation, if you're bad at discussion, if it's going to take you a while to get to the point where you can have some productive discussions, then you are not ready to learn anything and everything you want. You are a beginner at this, and you need to face reality and deal with it and figure out how to solve your problem. Like, there's something going wrong. There's things you're doing wrong in discussions. You need to figure out what they are and how do you fix them. And that takes however long it takes. For some people, it's pretty quick. For other people, if they lie to themselves a lot, if they're irrational, if they're biased, if they get really emotional about it, it could take a long time. Those are problems that people can have for a lifetime and never get past. Could you try to ignore those problems and discuss Popper anyways? Somewhat, maybe. But like, you could do it to the point that maybe you have some fun and you find it interesting. But if you actually want to really thoroughly understand all of it, write world-class essays on Popper, like contribute to the field, be a pioneer in the field, like really know what you're doing, then no, you need to fix those problems first. It is not realistic to be bad at discussion and then learn Popper like thoroughly and well enough that you can actually contribute useful, valuable ideas to the field. But if you just want to learn bits and pieces for fun while like misunderstanding half of it, you could do that while ignoring the problems. But that is not the kind of thing that I try to help people with. That's, if you want to do that, go somewhere else. You don't need me for that. So people can come to my forums and post about Popper from day one. What often happens when they do that is they make a bunch of mistakes about method and about Popper, and then it's hard to deal with. There's too many mistakes, overwhelming. And then they don't want to face reality about how bad their education was, how their education did not prepare them to have a rational discussion, how their professors or middle school teachers are not productive philosophers. And we're not, their teachers couldn't have a productive philosophy discussion. So no, their teachers did not teach them how to. It's not that Popper is so inherently hard. It's somewhat hard, but people have a lot of bad ideas from our culture that get in the way. They have things that, sabotage their discussions. They have irrationalities and so on. So the reason having 10 successful discussions is hard is because people do things to sabotage discussions. Like, there are ways people are irrational and ruin discussions. And a lot of people never get over that. And it's a lot harder to get over it if you don't want to acknowledge the situation you're in and then face it and then focus as a goal. I want to get better at having rational discussions. Like, if you're stuck on the goal, I want to learn Popper, and you see getting better at rational discussion as being sidetracked, as being just this temporary hurdle in your way that you don't really like, then you're probably never going to fix it. And that's kind of ironic because Popper said we learn by critical discussion, so you should learn about how to have a critical discussion. That is in fact relevant to Popper. It will help you with Popper stuff. Okay, so the critical rat guy, when they came to the forum, when they first arrived, they were predisposed. They had a pre-existing opinion that they thought accurate quoting isn't important. That is a bad attitude towards scholarship standards. It gets in the way, right? It's not just neutrality or ignorance. It is something that's actively causing problems and that he sticks up for, that he's adversarial about, that he's pushy about. It's not just that he has this bad idea, but he thinks he's right and he pushes for it. But also, it is about how to discuss, which is a topic he doesn't really want to discuss. He just wants to discuss Popper. So he's disagreeing about how to discuss, but not that interested in it, which really gets in the way of making progress. So to have successful conversations, you need some baseline understanding of what those look like. What does it take? How much effort does it take? How much precision and care and accurate quoting? How do discussions actually work? You need some good examples. If you don't really have a model in your mind of what a successful conversation is like, you're not ready to have a successful conversation about Popper. You should start with a simple toy conversation, get it right, and then escalate the complexity from there. So I'm not going to read 100% of this. You can read it on the screen yourself, or you can find the link in the description if you're interested in all the details. I was kind of doing that before, but I think I'm going to skip a little bit more now. So yeah, examples of successful conversations, gives guidance. Okay, so now this is a specific idea I had. You want to have, if you're going to talk about X, let's suppose X has 100 complexity points. Then, before you talk about X, as sort of a bare minimum, you should have had a successful conversation with 80 complexity points. Don't increase the conversation complexity by more than 25% at a time. So if you've done 100, next time you can do 125. And then the time after that, you can do 155, around there. That's aggressive. You should probably go slower than that. But if you're going a lot faster than that, bad idea. It gives us some sort of guidance. You want to build up the complexity and difficulty of your conversations. So each one is only, 10 or 20% harder than the previous one. And however many it takes to get from where you are now, whatever you can do successfully now, just to start with, you should scale down your expectations, just make it as easy as possible or needed until you get to the point you can have a successful discussion. Just have a discussion that you can have successfully right now. That's your starting point, and then have one that's 10% harder, then 20% harder than that, then 10% harder, then 15% harder. Just keep working your way up. until you actually get to the sort of complexity of a Popper discussion. A lot of people come here with the idea most errors don't matter much. They think like a lot of errors, especially like quote small ones, can be ignored. This is a way that they screw up discussions, and it's incompatible with CR. So if you actually learn how to discuss correctly, you will end up learning a lot of CR stuff, by the way. But this is like a general purpose discussion. So like we could replace Popper with Feynman and his physics ideas. And so then if you learn how to discuss, that's not really a preview of how physics works. But it would still be quite useful if you learned how to discuss before trying to discuss Feynman's ideas. You shouldn't skip that and have no idea how to have a rational discussion and then like try to debate and discuss physics. Because physics is pretty hard. So start with something simpler, work your way up, same thing. But with CR in particular, like the specific topic, learning how to discuss is actually highly relevant to CR. So you find out things like, don't ignore errors in a discussion. That's actually an epistemology idea. And like the concept of a small error. What makes an error big or small? What makes an error ignorable? Like those are actually epistemology ideas. But they're also part of how do you have a rational discussion. So this was a correction. I exaggerated something. Someone pointed it out. I fixed it. So I wrote the one exception when I should have just said like the main reason or something. Let's see what I fixed it to. I just removed the text. Oh, an exception. Here we go. An exception is. Yeah, so I just changed it from the one exception is X to an exception is X. And then I mentioned it because it's an important exception. But yes, there do exist other ones. Anyways, it's an example of like I accept corrections, and it's an example of like a good quality comment. Like they made a correction and they were correct and I fixed it. So that was a rational mini discussion. A lot of people don't have much experience even with this much of a discussion going successfully. Like how often have you said something and then the other guy says you're right, like about a philosophy kind of discussion topic, rather than about the menu at a restaurant. Right, Dagny says, this is about offering information preemptively. So you can't explain everything preemptively. Because there's like a million things people could have doubts or questions about. There's so many things you could preemptively explain. There's so many possible mistakes. There's like an infinity of possible ways to make a mistake, get something wrong, misunderstand something, whatever. So you can't preemptively deal with all of them. You can only preemptively deal with a few, like the most common errors, the ones you anticipate. But mostly, for most misconceptions someone could have, most confusions, most problems, people have to discuss. They have to communicate what their problem is and say, this is the problem I'm having, how do you help with that one? And then you can answer because they've narrowed down infinity ways they might be confused to a particular way. These are some links to introductory things. You might find this useful. So the article's in the description, and then you just scroll down to this, and you can find these links if you want. Okay, a way new people cause problems. This is by me. Quoting related errors, including like misparaphrasing, like saying something as someone's belief, and you're putting like incorrect words in their mouth, but you didn't use a quote. So I point out this is fraud. It violates their rights. So, for example, if you say they knowingly serve unsafe food at their restaurant, like that's slander, that affects their business, you can get fucking sued for that, deservedly. You're not allowed to lie about people in certain ways. So the quoting stuff is important. Do not tell the world false stories about what someone's beliefs are. Like, if you said, he said he liked hitting women, you're accusing someone of being an abuser, and that's not okay. Like, you can't just make that shit up and lie about it. When you misquote people, whatever the misquote, it's the same sort of thing where if people are expecting an exact quote and it's not, then you have misrepresented what that person said. You're fucking with their life. And if you paraphrase what they said, like, he said he's in favor of induction when actually he's anti-induction, it's the same kind of thing as a misquote. Now, the occasional honest mistake is okay, but you should basically have approximately 0 mistakes in quotes. Quotes you can do exactly, like, those are avoidable errors to misquote people. When you get to, like, more paraphrasey things where you're sort of summarizing someone's view, it's not always going to be perfect, which is why you don't put it in quote marks, first of all, so people know it's not perfect. So the occasional honest mistake will happen, but you have to act reasonably. You have to be not too careless. You have to put in a culturally standard amount of effort into not misleading people, not getting it wrong. Which goes up a lot depending on the stakes. Like if there's $1 million at stake, a business transaction, people are more careful. If someone's reputation is at stake, you should be fairly careful. If you're trying to have a serious discussion, if you think the discussion is actually important and valuable, you should be fairly careful. If you're just having a casual chat with your friend and you think it doesn't really matter that much, it's small talk, then you can be more careless. But if you're dealing with people who are like intellectuals who care about truth-seeking, and you care about truth-seeking, you want to be an intellectual, then you should think that stuff actually matters. That's kind of important. So take it seriously and put in a decent effort into not spreading falsehoods about what people's ideas are. And if you screw it up, say you're sorry and fix it. Retract it, edit it, whatever. And be more careful next time. If you have a pattern of screwing these things up, like you should be like, holy shit, I'm messing up in a big way. I need to improve my discussion skills. Rather than saying, oh, you guys complain too much, blah, blah, blah. Have a reasonable attitude to this. Fix it instead of being a jerk about it. Okay, next post. Requirements for philosophy discussions. So I said to make progress at learning how to think well and discuss philosophy and understand what ideas are true and how to learn and so on. There's 4 things. Exceptions are possible but like very hard. So 1, you need some time, attention, effort, and willingness to both read and discuss. 2, fluent in English. This was specific to FI, so like making progress at FI. Right, so like if you're Japanese, maybe you can find a Japanese discussion forum and learn stuff there, but you're not going to be able to make progress at my forum using Japanese language. Sorry. The reason I mention this is because people come to my forum who are partially fluent in English. So like they'll talk in English on the forum, which is an English language forum, but their English is pretty bad. And that is actually a major problem, like because philosophy involves like exact statements and details, and like people are careful about what their words are. And if you're like half fluent in English, you're not going to be catching all the nuances of what people say. You're not going to know the difference between synonyms. You are going to make a lot of errors just because your language skills aren't good enough. And so it's not realistic to make a lot of progress at these hard philosophy ideas when you're missing prerequisite skills, like understanding the language well. Okay, third thing, broad curiosity and interest in ideas, truth, and reason. So if you only care about like 1 or 2 narrow things, like I want to invent an AGI, an artificial general intelligence, but you don't really care in general about how to think and what ideas are true and so on, you only want things that directly help with you, that usually doesn't work. Like your interests are too narrow, you just shut down most discussions, you don't want to think about most things, you're probably not going to get anywhere. You have to be a little bit more of a generalist than that, which is actually necessary. Like if you want to make an artificial general intelligence, you actually need to just learn a bunch of philosophy. Like the way people will try to be narrow, I use that example because it's common with those people. The ways they try to exclude things and say, oh, that's irrelevant, that's off topic, they sabotage their own project. Like they should learn the basics of political philosophy, economics, psychology, not just software stuff. Like be more of a Renaissance man. It will help you with what you're doing. Okay, and then final thing, I said at least one of the following 3 things. So 1, honesty, 2, skill, knowledge, or smarts, or 3, social compliance, deference, respect, being impressed by FI, seeing value there, wanting to give it a chance. So you can be like friendly or smart or honest. You're going to need at least one of those, because that gives people like a way to interact with you. But if you have none of those, it's really, really hard to interact with you. Like there isn't an in, there's no way to connect with you productively. Next comment. I said FI is a good place for trading value. And discussion is of value to us if you follow rational methodology. But if you're not following rational methodology, you're probably not offering value. Because in general, people who show up do not have ideas about their field that are actually valuable to us, because philosophy is such a powerful critical tool that non-philosophers in some other field, they get a bunch of things wrong that our criticisms can point out. And so their ideas aren't that great. Not that like the whole fields are worthless, but like I've already read overviews of your field, so I know like the main ideas. And then, so anyway, I suggest 2-section posts as a standard thing people can do. So in one section, you control one section, the other person controls one section. So in your section, you can ask whatever you want, say whatever you want, like your choice. And then the other section, they ask whatever they want, they say whatever they want. So there's like half the discussion where it's whatever you want, and half the discussion where you reply to whatever they want. That way you guys are both getting some of the stuff you want. That's a tip for a good way to have a discussion. Next comment. If you're talking about something and I think you're wrong and that you're irrational, like both together, you're not offering value. Or if it's basic stuff I already know, plus you're irrational. Because you're not teaching me something new and useful, and also you're not discussing in a way that's going to reach conclusions and clear up our disagreements, which is what rational discussion is like. If you think your discussion methodology is rational, and I disagree, we could discuss that. Like, that's a topic I'll be happy to discuss with you. But if you just want to ignore that problem with no arguments, we're going to have a hard time. The rest of the comments aren't that interesting. So, this is one blog post plus some comments, and I hope you found it interesting and useful, and I wanted to expose people to written stuff on YouTube instead of just talking. I hope people will see the value in the writing and that the words are actually useful and stuff. And I hope that for people who do read it and who like reading, that the verbal explanations add extra information that helps them understand it better. I think that's actually my biggest goal, because I didn't go through every single thing that was said. If you don't read it, you're like missing stuff. But I'm trying to like supplement the writing with more, because like learning's hard, so like the more help I can give you, the better. If you liked this, consider helping fund my work on Subscribestar, which is like Patreon, except they haven't deplatformed a bunch of people. Links in the description.